I would just like to introduce you in terms of everything you've done for our community. Dr. Elizabeth Cohen, as most of you probably know, was a parent at Booker T, and she's a parent alum who, from the time she left, continued to give back to the school in so many ways: workshops for parents, workshops for teachers, for students, and these kinds of relationships that Dr. Elster builds and our school community builds are really part of the Booker T education. So we are so grateful to have you here again with us and really look forward to the evening.
Thanks so much, Allison, and thanks, Dr. Elster, for having me. So good to see everybody. And if you want to turn on your screen, if you can, just for me to be able to see your face for a minute, that would be great anytime throughout, just to connect. I just want to say that I love coming and talking to the Booker T community. Um, I was just sharing with Allison that I remember when Dr. Elster was sharing in my first kid who went to Booker T's orientation about how there's this, I know on the corner, the way people talk about Booker T and how people see Booker T is so different than what it really is at its heart. Booker T has a deep dedication to social and emotional development. I know this both as a parent and as a clinician who works with a lot of kids in your school. Just how much the teachers and the guidance counselors, the administration, the parents really care about social emotional health. And so it's an honor to be asked to come and talk to the team, the parents, the administrators. And I'm so grateful for Dr. Elster's commitment and leadership of the school. So I'm really happy to be here. Um, and so I just wanted to just say, we're all kind of just taking off wherever we just were and just take a minute to kind of feel yourself in the chair or car, wherever you are. Just notice that we're landing here together in this space. And in some ways, give yourself real or virtual pat on the back for taking the time to sit and share. Yeah, Jessica, good. Uh, about how to help our kids. We've all got so much other stuff. I usually do curse, but I'm gonna try not to. Stuff to do, right? But we're taking the time now to sit, to listen, and to be together. And so just to give yourself a moment of, even if you're like me and you screamed at your kid this morning, here I am today. So we always return to moments of acceptance for ourselves because being a parent is incredibly hard, and especially nowadays. So I wanted to start with a little exercise, kind of a visualization. You can have your eyes open or closed. Um, just take a minute and kind of reflect back if you can, and imagine what you were thinking about when you first started imagining, fantasizing about considering having children or even adopting children, whatever your case may be. Just try to go back to those days. Maybe you were just fantasizing about what it would be like to have a kiddo. And you think about that excitement and the hopefulness. Think a little bit about what were the possibilities you imagined? What were the hopes you had for your kid? And what were your dreams for them? Before we even knew what they looked like. And if anyone feels like sharing, we have a small intimate group tonight, so we could just kind of share together if anyone has something they would share that came to mind. If not, it's fine.
I can share what I used to think back when my first was I just like a little blueberry, and then grew into the walnut and then the, very smooth sugar in your belly. But to me, it was like this whole concept of like the world is their oyster. And it was way
Mm,
before you had all those like daily challenges that you're just facing day in and day out. And I still feel that way to a certain degree, but you just get so like ground down in in the current moment, and it can feel overwhelming with all the stuff coming at our kids.
Exactly. Beautifully said, Jessica. Thank you. And I wrote down the world is their oyster. I have chills, that idea of what possibility, what excitement. I know for me, I think it'll be so much fun. And it's like, wow, I thought it would be fun. Like all of these experiences. Anyone else want to share? So the world will be the oyster. Mine is fun. Anyone else want to share? For those joining, we're just talking about when we imagined our kiddos. I bring this up for two reasons, this exercise. Nancy, did you want to share? You're unmuted. It's fine if you don't. I just wanted to make sure I caught you. No. Okay. So the reason I like this, oh yeah, Liz, please.
I was just thinking, just remember this sense, the world is their oyster sort of reminded me, I just got, like I was an only child, divorced parents, and I just remember being really excited about starting new adventures, like this idea of having kids and starting new adventures. And that sense of the world's your oyster just resonated with me. That's what I remember, that feeling.
Yeah. A possibility, hopefulness, possibility, positivity, right? Yeah. So the reason I bring this up is for two reasons. The first is I really want us to get reconnected to our pure, true parenting values before systems of academia, parenting book, all the systems of oppression, I think, kind of came into play. Because these are our core values that we want them to feel that they can do anything. Their world is their oyster. For me, that I want them to have fun, that you want them to have adventures, and you want to have adventures with them. And that was before we were tainted by anything, really before we were tainted by the should and the should have and the do's and the don't. I remember when I really lost that moment of innocence. My son was playing in the playground, and parents started talking. I guess he was like almost 2, about preschool. And I just kind of felt this pressure and this trapping experience of, oh my God, now we're talking about a hierarchy and getting in and getting. I remember feeling like the fun just kind of getting a little bit squished. And so I really want, if you could tonight, to kind of, and as you move on from here, keep reflecting on those values and asking yourself if you can bring just a little bit of that into your interactions with your kids and your thoughts about your kids. So it's a practice you can do throughout, and you can do with anyone else in the house. The second reason I want to talk about that moment before you actually had the kids, what you hoped and dreamed of for them, is because it's so important for us to uncover any dreams we've had that maybe aren't being fulfilled. So why does this matter? Well, Carl Jung, one of the leading therapists, has this quote, which maybe you've heard before. The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of its parent. We all know about the mom who couldn't be a prima ballerina and pushes her daughter to be a ballerina. That's an obvious example. But we all carry these unknown desires, hopes for our kids that we put out there, that we project. And it's okay, we all do it. And the most important thing is that we know that we're doing it. So for me, as a person who is neurotypical, having neurodivergent kids really was a challenge for me. I didn't know how to work in that world. I didn't think this was going to be part of my life. And it continues to be a challenge for me. But my awareness of the discrepancy, I believe, helps me get through it. So the reason we want to always ask ourselves is, what's coming up for me? What are my dreams? What are my hopes? Even if my kid isn't giving me this, is because the more we know about ourselves, the less we put in on our kids. So it's really an important piece. So we must really, our number one job in parenting, this is going to sound very counter, is actually to bring the focus back to ourselves. To always stay in tune with ourselves, to understand what is coming up for us. This is our job. There's a great book by Dan Siegel called Parenting is an Inside Job. And the whole book is about how do you connect to what is going on with you. That might be meditation. That might be therapy. That might be journaling. It might be the trusted people in your school, in your community, in your family. But always asking yourself, when anything is happening, this can be applied to any situation too, but especially with parenting, what's coming up for me? Because if we and there's nothing wrong or right about stuff coming up for you, but we can just kind of know what it is and clear it out and decide if we want to pay attention to it or not. We don't want to always push it away, but we want to know that we're stirred up. I gave that example about my kids having neurodivergence, and as someone who always got such incredibly high grades, I didn't know what to do with them getting C's and D's and struggling. And so what I did as a kid was, if something was a problem, I clamped down harder on it. So that's what I did to them. That's what I thought I should do. And it turned out that wasn't the right thing to do. That didn't work. So I start with this always as it's counterintuitive. We want to fix the kids. We need to focus on what's going on for us. So that's the first piece. I want to talk a little bit about mental health issues and how we define them. So CDC data just came out last week, really upsetting data. 3 in 5, or 57% of teen and preteen girls felt persistently sad and hopeless in 2021. It's the highest level reported in the past decades. We are seeing anecdotally in my clinic a huge increase in preteens and teenagers with hopelessness, depression, and a lot of increased suicidality. It's really intense. I mean, the teenagers in general and preteens are really struggling. I want to talk first about COVID. I was able, luckily, to give some talks at Booker T about COVID during the time. And, the way I've been reading and conceptualizing about COVID is the experience is a trauma, not unlike if one of your kids, and maybe one of your kids had this, had heart surgery as a third grader, right? So they're in middle school now. Their heart is fine. They don't even have to go for many follow-ups, but they've had this traumatic experience that happened 3 or 4 years ago that totally disrupted their life. They weren't sure they were going to live. The whole family system was disrupted. And just because their heart is okay now, the experience of what happened around them, they're still holding it. They're still carrying it. All of our children have experienced a trauma. Living in a war-torn area, like any sort of trauma that has impacted them, that they carry. And so I think it is absolutely, these numbers that are getting higher and the kids we're seeing in our practice has absolutely to do with COVID, both the experience of COVID and what happened with schooling. So we just have to know, like, this is a different talk I would have given if there wasn't COVID. I mean, we just have to say that it's just the underlying experience of these kiddos. Fear, and the way we describe trauma, I talk in my other talks about this, is something that feels like it was an existential threat to their nervous system. And so it doesn't surprise me that a lot of what we're seeing is existential trauma responses. What is the point of living? Feeling hopeless. It's very, it makes sense given what these kids had to face. So we just really need to acknowledge that, like, we might not be wearing masks and we might be back at school full time, but the impact of this on them will be with them. And we need to meet them with that knowledge. I am hoping, my secret hope is that this will be the thing that kind of shakes up some of the hierarchical systems of education, and it kind of helps us see that kids need different things. That's my dream. Um, so the second piece, so that's the COVID piece. The second thing I just wanted to kind of explain to y'all is that the way we look at psychiatric disorders typically is more internalizing disorders, or what we call externalizing disorders. So internalizing disorders are disorders that typically you think of as depression, anxiety. With anxiety, there's OCD, low self-esteem. These are disorders that are internal in the sense that the suffering is private, it's internal, and very often parents might not see it. It's really important. So many of my wonderful parents who come to the clinic will say, like, I didn't even know this was happening. That's so typical with internalizing disorders, that the kids themselves are holding so much and you can't see it on the outside. And then there's the externalizing disorders, which are more commonly attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which we know now is not actually just about attention. It's about emotion regulation. It's about overall regulation of your behavior and your thoughts. Oppositional behavior, maybe tics or Tourette. And those are more observable by the teachers and by parents. And sometimes, interestingly, less distressing to the kids. So you have the kind of opposite effect where the parents are like, you got to help this kid. And the kid's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I think it's always really important to have, for teachers, for administrators, and for parents to think about any sort of mental health struggle as an iceberg. That your own, like, what you're seeing is very often only the tip. It's only the tip, especially for preteens who have this developmental shame anyway of appearing like they have it all together. And so, and this, I don't say this to scare you about the iceberg, but just to know that they're not, that it's more serious, but that there can be a lot more underneath it. So sometimes people will call the clinic and say, I'm not sure, they say they want to talk to a therapist, they're feeling kind of down. And if your kid says that, you can assume they're feeling maybe more than they're really ready to say. And what an amazing opportunity for the kid to say that. And so I think it's really important to feel both aware and sensitive to what your kids are saying, and also not catastrophize. And this goes back to what's coming up for us in our own nervous system and in our own bodies. You might just want to notice if anyone's feeling a little agitated or worried or stressed about it. Oops, it looks like someone's unmuted. Because if let's say we've grown up with someone who had depression, or we have a lot of stories about our college, we just need to kind of keep grounding ourselves and remind ourselves that this is our kid right in front of us. This is not my parent who was depressed or my roommate who was depressed. We want to constantly keep regulating our nervous system so we can show up for our kiddo, but again, with as little bit of our stuff as we can. So given the data, given how hard life has been for everyone for the last few years, what can you do? So this is not all, I'm here to also help you with what you can do. So the first thing I want to say, hi, Anne, welcome. The first thing I want to say, again, a bit of a counterpoint, is that as parents, we are taught very often from culture and from systems that we are supposed to get our child to do an appropriate behavior, that it is a hierarchical, all the time, a hierarchical relationship where we are in power and we are telling them what to do. And I want to kind of flip that a little bit on its head. Again, not to say, and we can talk about this in the questions part, that there aren't limits that need to be set. But I want to encourage you and challenge you a little bit to think about putting your relationship first. If you think about in your own life, what helps you get through hard times? What would you say those are? Like, think about, COVID or a recent, maybe a death or an illness. What helped you get through that? Does anyone want to share?
Being able to talk with others about it and share experiences.
Yeah, great. Social support. Yep. And Jessica, do you remember when you talked to people about it? Was it helpful for people to just kind of listen, or give you advice? Like, what was your experience of what was helpful?
It was just kind of helpful to see that people were going through the same thing and just to have that shared experience. So, this was my husband and I always joke about how our marriage, the low point was March 2020. And just to know that that was sort of a common experience for people and how difficult it was, so that you don't feel like alone in the challenge.
Beautiful. Well said. Anyone else want to share? There's I know for me, when my father was ill recently, having people check in, having people share their resources was really helpful. And so our kids are the same as us. They really need us to listen and be there for them. They have teachers. Think about their days for a minute. They have so many people telling them what to do. That bus driver, the teachers, the guy at the bodega. Like, all it is people telling them what to do. And we are the ones who can possibly be there to hear them and listen to them fully. And I want to teach a little. I heard this great, I think it was Fran Lebowitz who said, when we listen, we're not really listening. Most of us are just waiting, because we're waiting to answer, right? We're listening, but we're thinking, wow, did they do that? Or why did they do that? I'm going to tell them this. I mean, this is with partners, with friends, at work. It's very difficult to just compassionately, empathically, unconditionally listen, especially with kids, because we do know better. I mean, let's just say, I say this all my time, like, we do know better. We are older. Like, we've had way more experience. So, like, whatever they're going through with their friends, we probably have better advice for them than they do. They're in middle school. However, they are not necessarily asking us for our advice, and giving advice may not be what they need to move through a difficult situation. We were just talking about this idea of the Zamboni parent that I learned. I used to call it the snowplow. So there's the helicopter parent. We all kind of know not to hover. But the Zamboni or snowplow parent is the parent that makes everything so smooth that there's never a problem and there's no roughage and no roughness. So the kid will never have any problem. And as Allison pointed out beautifully, that she doesn't like to skate after the Zamboni because it's actually really slippery. Like, you actually need a little bit of roughness to get some traction. And so when we jump in, when they want to tell us what's going on, and we jump in with a solution, and we jump in with, again, very good ideas, we are robbing them from the opportunity to either learn from a mistake or and fall down, or to feel the agency and have the dignity to have done it themselves. It is excruciating as parents to see your kid making an enormous mistake, knowing that it could be totally prevented. But I will tell you, because I work with teenagers and kids in their 20s and 30s and 40s, I see these kids in my practice. And people who have cleared everything out for them, and they've never had really have a hard time, have their first job, they have their first feedback session or whatever, a review, and they get 3s instead of 4s, and they fall apart, and they leave the job, or they get angry at the boss. It catches up with you. I promise you it catches up with you. So this idea of putting the relationship first, of listening empathically before you jump into a solution. And one thing I recommend for people is just give yourself 24 hours. If you're like, oh my God, I got to tell her what to do with it about her friends, set your timer for a day. If in 24 hours you still feel the same urgency, you let me know. So the other day, my daughter's in high school, she calls me. She's working on a chemistry project with kids. They're mad at her because she didn't do her part of the project. I was so impressed with her because she was like, they're right, I didn't. Like, she fully acknowledged it. And her friend was mad. She said, can I come home? I'm so upset. I need a mental health day. And, you know, my kids have a therapist as a mom, so they know exactly what to say. So she's saying, can I come home? I'm really upset. I need to focus on myself. And I needed her to come home. I do this all the time. Someone needs me come home and go in the bed. But I knew, I just said, and this sounds so hard. This sounds so awful. It sounds so painful. You need to stay in school, because even when we're upset, we have to be in our commitments. Because I knew that if she stayed, she and this girl would end up talking by the end of the day, which of course they did. So she comes, and this is, by the way, I've experienced my kids every day. You know, this big thing. And then at night I'm like, oh, how did it go with that? What? Oh, I don't even remember. Because if I don't step in, they have this ability to move through it, and they don't have to report it to me because it doesn't have anything to do with me. And then they might still want to come to me and tell me about it. That's the other piece, the relationship building piece. In my experience as a therapist and as a mom, the most important thing I want, my dream, was for them to feel comfortable coming to me and sharing what was going on with them. Because life is hard, things are going to be crappy, but if they can come and tell you, then they have a safe place to go. They know, and they've learned that someone will show up for them. That is really, really what we want them to learn, not that there are no problems in the world. So the other thing about listening, just so you know, we only listen for 10 seconds. So even if you think you have the greatest idea for your kid, you've got 10 seconds to tell them. So save those 10 seconds for a time when they maybe won't really be able to hear you. You know, when you come home from work and you're upset, and you tell them about something, that you tell your partner something that has happened at work, and then they start giving you all these ideas of what you should do, and you're like, please be quiet, I just wanted to be upset. That's how our kids feel all the time when we give them ideas. So the other thing I do is I do ask my kids, do you want advice or do you want support? Especially when I just want to give advice. I ask them which they want to choose. And they probably 99% of the time say support, because they know what to do. They will do what they're going to do. Okay, the second thing is acceptance. This is really, really, really hard. But we all of us spend so much time fighting reality. We just all do. And not in acceptance. It's a really hard muscle to practice. But this goes back to the dreams of what our kids are going to be. Like, accepting that they are going to make mistakes, or accepting that they're not who we thought they were going to be, or they're not who your niece and nephew are. Really accepting them for who they are in the moment is an incredible gift for them, because that's what really mental health is, which is accepting yourself in the moment, warts and all. And so we want to mirror that for them. We want to not punish them for being something that they're not. We want to meet them where they are. I can tell you, this is really scary, because you can feel like you're really losing power and control. A lot of us, we all want to be in control, the natural biological need to feel. And so it's undoing that. And I'll give you an example again of my daughter. I mentioned she was neurodivergent. She was in middle school during COVID, very difficult transition to high school. And she was doing very poorly. Her grades were really poor. And we tried everything. We checked her Google Classroom. We were on her, and nothing was getting better. And I luckily, really had a moment of being on my hands and knees, and just thought, I have to accept this. Let's just say this is her experience. Let's say this is what she can do. She did need some outside help, but we got her the outside help. And then my husband and I stepped back, and I had no idea what was going to happen. I thought, you know what? She might just fail and maybe she'll have to make up school, like whatever that is. I let go, and I will say, because I had that moment where I thought, and we're losing our relationship because I'm on top of her all the time. I'm nagging her, and she can't stand me. And like, I don't care about the grades as much as I care about our relationship. And she said to us 2 weeks ago, she said, because you stepped back, I have been able to do this myself. And I actually care about how I'm doing. Now, full disclosure, because I'm crazy, because I am a person and a mom. I was thinking, you're not, I mean, fully thought that, did not say it, but fully thought that. That's how much my stuff is still going and swirling, but I'm doing everything I can to step back and let her do it herself. And I gave her the space, and she rose to the occasion. And again, she is not suffering from a severe mental illness. Like if she was, this would be different. I'm talking now about a kid who's struggling, who is not suffering from mental illness. So we can talk about other situations. But I just want to say that giving her that space was excruciating for me, but it has helped her feel like she has more agency. I just also want to say that so many parents that we see from Booker T and all the specialized high schools and everything, they always say the same thing to us, which is our kids are so perfectionistic, and I don't know where they get it because we have never talked about grades, or we don't put pressure on grades. And I just have to say, this is where they've gotten it. I will tell you, we live in New York City. They've applied to middle school. We live in a culture of hyper hustle culture and academia. We live in a hierarchical, like they have it. It's like I remember there was a study that said if you never said anything to your kids about sugar and never exposed them to sugar once, they have something like 10,000 messages in a week about sugar. Like it's like they see it anyway. So even if you have never said a word about grades, they feel it everywhere. And so it's not your fault if they're perfectionistic. It is not something you've done wrong. This is the culture that we live in. So don't deny that your kids will feel this, because they all do. And also don't blame yourself. And the best trick for working with perfectionism is to own all your mistakes. At dinner, we have like a time where we all talk about our mistakes, what we've done wrong, how we messed up, what we learned from it. That I was just reading that there's a Native American tribe that prays that they will have 30 mistakes a day, because that's where they learn. So if they don't have 30 mistakes a day, they're not doing enough to make a mistake to learn more. And so this is a cultural shift we have to have. And saying to your kids, we don't care about grades. Don't worry about grades. None of that works. It's really modeling making a mistake and moving through it. And you can see how the kids, they all just feed off each other. I mean, and suddenly there's this whole hoopla around the importance of grades. And the last thing I want to talk about before I read you this really special poem is a topic I talked a lot about, which is the golden and. You know, I want to really help all of you understand that it's never, and your kids, it's never either or. It's always both. It's both and. So we can feel both scared and proud. We can feel both overwhelmed and excited. That we don't have to feel just one feeling at a time. In fact, what makes us whole is the ability to have many feelings. This is my feelings pillow that, of course, I have that people have sent to me. But we need to, and it's purposely a wheel, because you need to have all the feelings to have the wheel be able to move. And when your kid comes to you and says that they're feeling one feeling, just know that there's always the possibility for them to feel more than one thing, and for you to feel more than one thing. And I can't encourage you enough to have community, to have people you can talk to go where, as we say, like to go where it's warm, to go to people who get it, like Jessica said, who can say, yeah, I've been there, no shame, we're in it together. We're not going to get through this mental health crisis of our kids and the after effects of COVID alone. That's one thing we learned deeply. We have to be in it all together, supporting each other deeply, empathically, and lovingly. And Allison and I were just talking about this, my son, Dr. Elster will be shocked, is getting into college, going to college. Yeah. And that whole process also has been preparation for life, because he's going to have a mean boss, and he's going to have a mean roommate, and he's going to have to struggle and figure it out. So this is an ongoing process, and the fact that y'all are doing it now means you're starting early, and you're not alone. So I want to read this poem that really, I think, by the poet Khalil Gibran, who is a Lebanese poet, which maybe some of you know, and it's called On Children. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children, as living arrows, are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. So if there's anything you can remember from tonight, it is that you can give your children love, but they are not yours. You are preparing them from the moment they came into your life to be their own people. Thank you so much for having me and letting me share. And I'm open to all the questions you might have. Anything mental health related, whether I covered it or not, I'm happy to answer anything. Mary, please. Hi.
Hello. Hi. I thank you for everything tonight. This is so helpful and really a wonderful conversation. I think there are probably so many things that people could jump in on so many things you've said. Just one thing I was thinking about as you were talking about COVID, and I, agree 100% of how, the traumatizing experiences and the ongoing effects for everybody from that. So I'm glad I appreciate you talking about that. But another thing that seems to track sort of on a timeline, time-wise, in terms of increase with mental health issues with younger people is the social media topic and the digital use of, the digital media, et cetera. So I wonder, just from your professional experience, if you can talk about that some. And, the context here is just having a young kid who we're trying to keep away from social media and finding it like the bombardment around that and like a tsunami everywhere of pressure almost to be on social media, even at 11, even last year at 10, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Just any thoughts, advice, or how it's sort of tracking with some of these issues?
Oh, Mary, thanks so much for bringing that up. It's such an important question and such an important issue. And you're absolutely right. I mean, even before COVID, the data, especially on girls, was staggering, the decrease in self-esteem. I think they tracked it from like when Instagram was an issue started. I don't know if anyone has seen that movie. It's by the guys who do the podcast Undivided Attention, The Social Dilemma. I think that's what it's called. It's a documentary. Yeah, it's really good, and it's a really good movie, actually, Mary, if your kids haven't started using social media, to watch with them, because it really explains that how they try to grab your attention, and so it really explains it. And so you're absolutely right. It's a really big problem, and you're bringing up the point too, which we have kids in our practice too, who we have a couple who parents haven't let them have it, and it's actually impacting them socially. because they don't know anything about the people they talk about. They don't know anything about, the YouTubers. I'm like, now it's not 100 because I don't even think people use YouTube anymore, but like TikTok or whatever. Like, and so then they're out socially. And so it's such a dilemma for parents. You're totally right, Mary. I mean, I think the issue is it's about kind of regulation in general. So it's how do we help kids regulate essentially their attention? How do we help them as best as we can think about what it does to their bodies and to their nervous system to be on social media all the time? And so I think like anything, like food, sleep, super hard one way, extremes are problematic because kids will just push back against that. But if you can have a kind of ongoing dialogue, and I would recommend, because I'm sure your kids are able to talk about, like really looking at the data. And that's why I like the movie, because the movie talks about how they're trying to manipulate your attention. And so in some ways we've talked about our son and our daughter, how to like not let them do that, right? And kind of use the adolescent rebellion to be like, well, I'm not going to let them, like, for example, on YouTube shorts or whatever those things are, like they use an algorithm. Like, how can you beat the algorithm? Like, you don't want to give the algorithm all your information. So kind of like teaching them to fight back a little bit. And it's really hard. I mean, there's some basic things like no phones in the bedroom, no phones at the table. You can do some rules like that. But it's really hard.
But do you think, I mean, one thing we're facing is, just by law, the federal, laws that are there to protect children, just the fact, the basic rule is you can't be on any of these sites, Instagram, anything until you're 13. And we talk about this all the time and talk about why, and, but that's not the reality that anyone's living in. I mean, our child, she has a phone for texting and calls, and there's no internet on it, so there's no social media access, no internet access, etc. That's a conscious decision for now, and we're happy about that. But it's having a child, and I mean all of us, in a climate where it's not the reality that every 9, 10, 11-year-old around you, which is several years younger than the 13-year-old age to actually even be like, allowed on, is sort of on this, and it's just a I'm just saying there's an overall cultural thing that's I find as a parent extremely hard to do. And we do, we looked at the video recently of the US Surgeon General talking about how he thinks that 13 is too young for social media and why. And you're, the hitting young children against expert designers who are adults who know how to, get it so you're hooked, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just an interesting, we talk with our child about all these different things in the news, etc. But I guess it's I don't know if there's anything that can be done culturally, like within a school or within the school districts or anything to try to regulate in any way the larger picture of it being allowed across the board everywhere.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems about like even taking the phones from the kids at school. Like there's a lot of problems with that with DOE. Like, yeah. And Marianne, one thing I just want to say is like thinking about being a radical parent, this idea of like, there was a time where people thought that women shouldn't work. Right. And then you have a radical idea of pushing against culture. And I'd encourage you to keep thinking about that and advocating and pushing. And just because everyone else isn't doing it doesn't mean you should give up. We have to be radical to make change happen. Thanks. Anyone else? Oh yeah, Nancy, hi, please.
Hi, Dr. Cohen. Thanks very much. I was in transit, so I've just been listening along. I was curious on just getting some advice on, balancing your child stepping up and taking, and having agency, right? To be accountable, do their own things, but in an environment where they're adjusting to middle school, hormones, peer pressure, whether real or not. And, where is the line between, allowing that child to try and own it as much as possible versus where they may need some support, because they get it, right? They get these rules, what are hurtful words? what might be borderline bullying or bullying, you know, how to take care of themselves or not succumb to feeling like, you know, they have to be a high performing student 100% of the time. But, you know, the peer piece seems to be just more, you know, it's more prevalent, right? I mean, it happens at middle school and then they figure it out in high school. I've got an older one who's a high schooler, but just acutely feeling that dynamic now. So just curious on, you know, how we help support them through, you know, this whole thing of friendship, peers, competition, you know,
Yeah.
FOMO, jealousy. I mean, it's, you know, with
Yeah.
the heaping dose of the emotional roller coaster, right? That's coming with these hormones. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'd appreciate some thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Such a good question, Nancy. I mean, you know, the social piece can just be gutting for us as parents. It just, you know, um, you, I guess the first thing I would start with, Nancy, is, and, you know, because I'm a therapist, is just think for yourself a little bit if you had any experiences. We've all had experiences, but like in middle school or things with friends, even now, like what your sticky points are around friends, just to make sure that we're separating out kind of like our fears of what happened to us happening to your kiddo. So that's kind of the first part, and just kind of give yourself the gentleness that you need around what might have been going on for you. Does that make sense? And then I think that really empathic listening is usually the best thing, because you know you're only hearing one side of the story from a brain that has trouble, um, seeing, an adolescent brain that still has trouble seeing a lot of perspective or nuance. And so, in my experience, sometimes when we come in with advice around the friend stuff, we might be missing the boat because there's a lot of other stuff we don't know about. And so, I find that really actively listening and asking, like, what, you know, so what did that feel like for you? And what did you want to do then? And what did you want to, like, really trying to like get asked as if you were a reporter or a therapist, just trying to get all of the details, but not saying, did you think about saying this? Or you could have asked them to sit with you at the table, or instead of giving kind of advice, to hold space for your kiddo to come to you and to share their struggle with it, might be the best. That's usually where I would start. I mean, just think, if you have a partner, if you have something at work with a coworker and you come and talk to your partner, do you usually want them to give you, if you have a partner, or some friend, do you want them to give you advice typically, or do you want them to just kind of listen to how annoying that person was to you? I'm just curious what you like.
Yeah, I mean, just in terms of how I want to receive it or how I want to share.
How you would want someone to receive your sharing. So you come in and you say, you know, this person said something unkind to me. I felt left out at the work event. How would you like to be supported, do you think?
Yeah, I think it depends on the moment, you know, definitely somebody to be, you know, a helpful ear. But I will say if it's something that's puzzling me, or I just, you know, just need to hear another perspective and get out of my own head to try and solution it, I will ask and say, hey, what do you think about it?
Great.
But
So
but
you
it's
can do
not all
that.
the time, right? Yeah, no, it's not all the time. But yeah,
Right.
you know,
So
being heard is great. I
yeah,
think
so
we all
maybe
need it too as adults.
always. So Nancy, maybe a good thing for you would be to say, hey, do you want me to just listen, or do you want some advice? To just kind of give your kiddo the chance to answer that. But I always think that when we have the urge to step in and give advice, it's really good to take like at least an hour before we do it, to just kind of calm our nervous system. And I just think, and I'm sure Dr. Elster will agree to this, like there's 100 million sides to a story. Like a conflict with two people, I mean, I can tell you as a couple therapist, there's a million sides, like a million things coming up to it. And so sometimes just sitting with the emotion can be helpful. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that helped. Thank you.
Other questions, thoughts, reflections, anything? Dr. Elster, you want to say something? You're muted.
Sometimes I also wish, which is kind of goes into your, waiting to respond, is that, that I wish that parents would encourage their kids also to like wait some time, to not jump on the response, because they're so reactive at this age that they also don't realize how they like add the oxygen to the fire. They just like give it, the more they talk about it, when they stand like in a group with their friends and they in the yard and they rant on somebody else and they spend the whole lunch period like talking about the issue, that it like and I think that like what you're saying is like waiting is good for them too, like don't give me your phone, because there's going to be no like texting about this for an hour or something, and then everything kind of calms down. Well,
I think that's a great reminder of putting time between a feeling and a reaction. And I think that the more your kids feel like they can come to you and talk it through, like at the end of the day, possibly the less they'll feel like they have to ruminate over it with their friends. I remember going to an amazing lecture where somebody said, everyone says for teenagers, oh, well, of course they just talk more to their friends than their parents. And it's like, we don't want that. Like, their friends know nothing about anything. Like, they don't give good advice. So you don't want them to like be able to move through that, as Dr. Elster is saying, without causing more trouble, and then come to you and really be seen and heard and held. It's a really good point. That's the other problem with the phone, is the anonymousness of the back and forth and the pain that comes up. Yeah. Any other questions? Thoughts?
Hi, this is Dina.
Hi, Dina.
Not to be the contrarian, but don't we also want them to be able to communicate with their friends one-on-one and work through that issue, instead of just saying to them, your friends don't know anything? Like, the fact is, that's how they learn and that's how they negotiate the world. Back to your Zamboni situation. If we tell them to put down the phones and we tell them to wait and not communicate with their friends, then eventually they don't have that life skill of how to negotiate that scenario. Because if we're waiting for them to come, if we're telling them, well, just wait and come talk to us at night, then they've just avoided an in the moment opportunity to learn how to actually address something. Like, they still need to have real life communication skills. Not that we can't later then, do like a review of a play-by-play of what went on, and then maybe say, okay, so I hear that that's what you and your friends decided, or that's where you thought this was appropriate, and then maybe we can redirect them if we think that maybe they could have done something differently. But oftentimes I'll just say, well, if this type of situation happens again, you may want to think about, or you may want to consider, or this may be an opportunity for. And this way, you let them own it somewhat. I mean, they still have to figure out how to, talk to teachers, and they still need to have conflict. I mean, life is not without conflict.
Absolutely. You bring up a good point, Dina, about the importance of, and the concern that people really have now about the difficulty with communicating one-on-one. And being able to actually handle difficult conversations. So you bring up a really good point about that, and I agree. One of the things I think is important is for all of us, including kids, to know really the best time to have a conversation, which is when our frontal lobes are on board and our emotional brain is a bit more quiet. And so my concern sometimes is that, and maybe this is what Dr. Elster was talking about too, that in the moment there's this kind of flipping your lid where you have trouble really calming your nervous system down, and you might be acting from a more emotional place. Now, we're all going to have those moments. We all have experiences like that, and you're absolutely right, Dina. Kids need to work through that. I do think that it's important to help kids know when is a good time to have, a constructive conversation. And, these kids really miss a lot of, again, because of social media, they don't have a lot of that. So I think they need a lot of training in that. And I agree with you that it's important to be able to talk things through. I mean, that's an incredibly important life skill, to be able to talk through differences. And so I think it's really important. I think it's important to help us all know. And I know, I mean, one of the hugest myths, this has not much to do with parenting, is like, don't go to bed mad. Your partner, like, go to bed mad. Like, please don't stay up all night trying not to be mad. Go to bed mad, wake up in the morning when you're rested, and then talk about it. It's that kind of thing. It's like, we want to help our nervous systems be as prepared for the most success as we can. And also, I would never tell the kids directly that their friends don't know anything. I wouldn't say that. I just say that to the grown-up. Okay, any last minute questions before we have to finish? These are all really great questions. Again, for those of you who were in here in the beginning, I just want to say, give yourself a pat on the back for taking an hour out of your busy night where we know you could be doing a million other things to come and listen to something about your kids' mental health. And if any of you have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat. I'm happy to help with any referrals or any thoughts about different treatment options. Put in my practices link as well. And I'm sure that I'll recording too.
Yes, I'll stop recording now.